In 1956, the McKinley Park neighborhood on the southwest side of Chicago was the kind of place that rarely made headlines. It was, and still is, a working-class community built on routine, where families often live on the same streets for years, and where life moves at a steady, predictable pace. Kids spent their days walking around nearby McKinley Park and Lagoon, and for the people who lived here, it was simply a good place to call home. It wasn't a place people associate with major crime, and certainly not with anything that would capture national attention. But that perception would change in a single night, because in the winter of 1956, two young sisters left their home for what should have been a fun night out and never came back. And when the truth finally began to surface, it was far more disturbing than anyone expected. What was initially treated as a possible runaway case slowly turned into something much darker. A double murder that left investigators searching for answers that never fully came together. Even decades later, the case would take another unexpected turn when new theories about a possible suspect began to surface, reopening questions many believed had already gone cold. But to understand how this case unfolded, we have to go back to 1956 and to the two sisters at the center of it all, Barbara and Patricia Grimes. In 1956, the Grimes family lived on Damon Avenue in the McKinley Park neighborhood of Chicago. The household was led by Loretta Grimes, a single mother raising her children on her own. Living in the home were her daughters Barbara and Patricia, along with their siblings Jimmy, Joey, Teresa, and Shirley. By all accounts, the family was close, and the children had many friends at school and were well known in the neighborhood. Barbara was 15 years old, a high school sophomore who was often described as the more serious of the two, while Patricia Grimes, at 12 years old, was energetic and outgoing. Despite their differences in personality, the two were extremely close and spent much of their time together. And like millions of American teenagers in the late 1950s, they were also deeply fascinated by Elvis Presley. On the evening of December 28, 1956, Barbara and Patricia asked their mother for permission to go to the Brighton movie theater to see Love Me Tender, a film starring Elvis Presley. The Brighton Theater, which has since been torn down, was located less than 2 miles from their home, making it an easy trip by bus. The girls had already seen the movie multiple times, but they wanted to see it again, this time for a late-night showing. After some hesitation, their mother agreed, allowing them to leave with the understanding that they would return home no later than midnight. It was a decision that would mark the last time the family would see them alive. At approximately 7:30 p.m., the two sisters left their home on Damon Avenue and made their way to the city bus that would take them to the movie theater in Brighton Park. Witnesses later confirmed that the girls arrived without any issues and appeared to be in good spirits. They were seen watching the movie and interacting normally with others who were there that night. The movie theater was running a double feature, and while many people left after the first showing, the girls decided to stay for the second. After the second showing ended, the sisters left the movie theater and were expected to make their way back home. They had arranged to meet their older sister and younger brother at a bus stop before returning home together. But when they failed to arrive at the agreed location, concern began to grow. The girls had never stayed out late like this before, and they had never missed curfew without calling their mother. As the night went on and midnight passed, it became clear that something was terribly wrong, and Loretta Grimes quickly contacted police to report her daughters missing. At first, authorities did not immediately assume foul play and thought the girls would return home the next day. But as hours turned into days and days into weeks, it became increasingly clear that this was something far more serious. What followed was one of the largest search efforts Chicago had ever seen at the time, with hundreds of law enforcement officials assigned to the case. The disappearance of two young sisters from a respected neighborhood in the middle of winter shocked the community and quickly became headline news across the city. Parents began warning their children not to go out alone, and fear spread throughout neighborhoods that had once felt completely safe. The fear was so strong that warning signs were even placed in storefront windows, telling kids not to talk to strangers. At the same time, reports of possible sightings began to come in from across the city and beyond, with numerous individuals claiming to have seen the sisters in the hours and days following their disappearance. Some witnesses claimed to have seen the girls boarding a bus near the theater shortly after the movie ended. According to these accounts, they got off the bus at Western Avenue around 11:05 p.m., which raised immediate questions about why they would leave the bus before reaching home. Soon after that, two teenage boys reported seeing the sisters around 11:30 p.m., just blocks from their home. The boys described them as laughing and having a good time, which would suggest they were still unharmed. Other sightings placed them much farther away from the south side of the city. A security guard on the north side of the city believed he spoke with them the next morning, and the girls had allegedly asked him for directions. In another part of the city, a restaurant owner claimed they were seen with two men early on December 30th, with one of the girls appearing too sick or intoxicated to walk properly. There were even reports placing them outside of Illinois entirely. One of the most widely discussed theories was that the girls had run away, possibly attempting to travel to Memphis, Tennessee because of their fascination with Elvis. Those rumors became so widespread that Elvis himself made a public statement urging the girls to return home to their mother. But from the very beginning, Loretta Grimes never believed they had run away and insisted that her daughters would not leave without telling her because that was something they simply wouldn't do. And as investigators would later conclude, she was right. Nearly 1 month after the girls disappeared, on January 22, 1957, Leonard Prescott was driving along German Church Road in a quiet suburb 30 minutes away from the movie theater when he noticed something unusual in a roadside ditch. As he drove past Devil's Creek, he noticed what he thought were mannequins lying in the snow, but when he returned to the location with his wife to take a closer look, they realized the horrible truth. What they had found on the side of the road weren't mannequins, they were the frozen bodies of two young girls. After the shocking discovery, authorities were immediately called to the scene, and the area was quickly secured by law enforcement. A short time later, Joseph Grimes, the girls' father, was called to the gruesome scene, and the bodies were identified as Barbara and Patricia Grimes. The bodies were nude and frozen and lying close together in the snow near a guardrail, and investigators believe the bodies had been quickly dumped there from a passing vehicle. The condition of the bodies raised immediate concerns because Patricia had small puncture wounds in her chest and Barbara showed signs of trauma to her face. Despite these findings, the initial autopsy concluded that the official cause of death was exposure to freezing temperatures. However, authorities still ruled the deaths as homicides due to the circumstances in which the bodies were found and the fact that it was clear the girls didn't end up at this location on their own. Further analysis from the autopsy revealed that the girls likely died within 5 hours of leaving the theater based on undigested food in their stomachs, the same food they ate for dinner before they left home to see the movie. This finding contradicted many of the reported sightings that occurred days later. After the bodies were found, the case intensified and suspects began to emerge soon after. One of the earliest suspects was Walter Kranz, a 53-year-old steam fitter who claimed to have psychic abilities. On January 15th, before the bodies were discovered, Kranz called police and claimed that both girls were dead and that their bodies were located in an unincorporated area of Lyons Township. He refused to give his name at the time and said he had seen the vision of the bodies in a dream. That call was traced back to a bar near his home, and police brought him in for questioning after patrons ID'd him and saw him using a payphone on January 15th, the same day authorities received the strange phone call. Kranz claimed that psychic visions ran in his family and that he had seen the location of the bodies after drinking heavily. What made his statement so unsettling was how close his described location was to where the bodies were eventually found, which was only minutes away. What's also worth noting is that Kranz had also recently been identified by a 7-year-old girl as the man who cut off a piece of her hair with scissors while sitting in a movie theater. Walter Kranz was considered a major suspect at one point, especially after handwriting experts suggested he may have written a ransom note sent to the family. But despite extensive questioning, no direct evidence linked him to the crime, and he was eventually released. Another major suspect was Edward Bedwell, or Benny as some called him. He was a 21-year-old drifter from Tennessee who played guitar and claimed to know Elvis Presley. He was arrested the day after the bodies were discovered after a witness claimed to see Bedwell with two girls matching the sister's description at a restaurant in Chicago. According to the owner, the girls entered the restaurant with Bedwell and another man early in the morning on December 30th and listened to Elvis songs on the jukebox before leaving. According to the witness, the girl, who looked like Patricia Grimes, appeared to be in distress, possibly sick or intoxicated, and was unable to walk properly. At one point, she staggered back to the booth inside the restaurant and rested her head on the table before nearly passing out. The two men attempted to get her into a car out front, but she resisted, and eventually, all four left together in the car. Benny Bedwell was secretly interrogated in a motel room for several days and confessed to the murders, claiming that he and another man went on a drinking binge with the girls before beating them to death when they refused further advances. He even showed authorities how he disposed of the bodies along the roadside. After all of this, it looked as though authorities had caught the killer, but as more details of the case unfolded during the trial, his confession quickly fell apart. Bedwell said they fed the girls hot dogs, but the autopsy showed no signs of hot dogs or alcohol in the girls' systems. And other than some bruising, there was no evidence they had been beaten to death, although this has been debated. Authorities also learned that Bedwell had been working a night shift during the time investigators believed the girls had died. And during the trial, he recanted his story, claiming he was kicked and beaten by the officers and forced to confess to the murders. Because of the lack of physical evidence and allegations of a forced confession, he was released from jail 1 month after his arrest. Another person of interest was Robert Max Fleeg, a violent 17-year-old who previously spent 22 months in a reform school after stealing cars and whipping his own father with a rubber hose. In December of 1957, almost 1 year after the Grimes sisters were found, Fleeg confessed to murdering a 14-year-old girl named Mary Lou Wagner after she refused his advances on a date. Fleeg beat the girl to death with a rolling pin he kept in his car and then dumped her body in a pond. According to a disturbing newspaper article from 1957, Fleeg washed the rolling pin after the murder and used it the next day in his father's bakery where he worked. In 1958, he was given life in prison for the murder, and although he was questioned about the Grimes murders, authorities cleared him for lack of evidence. He was also incarcerated in a reform school during the murders. One of the most disturbing and debated suspects connected to this case is a man named Charles Melquist, who often went by Chuck. At the time of the Grimes sisters' investigation, Melquist was a 23-year-old unemployed stonemason from the suburbs. He lived with his parents and sister, and while he was questioned about the Grimes sisters, he was never fully interrogated. But what makes his name continue to surface in this case is what happened just 1 year later. In 1958, Melquist was arrested and convicted for the murder of 15-year-old Bonnie Leigh Scott after confessing to it and reenacting the crime for authorities. Scott's body was discovered in a roadside ditch less than 10 miles from where the Grimes sisters had been found in 1957, and the similarities between the two cases immediately raised concern. Both involved girls of the same age, both victims were found nude, both bodies had been discarded along remote roadside areas, and in both cases, investigators struggled to determine an exact cause of death. What made the murder even more unsettling was the nature of his confession. He admitted to suffocating Bonnie Scott in his car using a pillow and even showed detectives how he did it, but that was not the most disturbing part. According to his statement, after dumping her body over a guardrail and fleeing the scene, he later returned with a butcher knife. When he came back, he mutilated the remains, ultimately decapitating Bonnie, and then he threw her head into the woods where it was later discovered by Boy Scouts on a nature hike. During his confession, he even admitted that he had an uncontrollable urge to return to the scene and mutilate the body. Because of that, some investigators and researchers have theorized that Melquist could have done something similar in the Grimes case. The idea is that after the sisters were killed and their bodies were left along German Church Road, the killer may have returned later with the intent to mutilate them, just as Melquist admitted doing in the Scott case. But unlike Bonnie Scott, the Grimes sisters' bodies had been exposed to freezing temperatures, and by the time anyone could have returned, the bodies would have been frozen solid. Some believe this could explain the shallow puncture wounds found on Patricia Grimes' chest, possibly the result of Melquist attempting to damage the bodies later, but being unable to do so due to the extreme cold. There are other details too that have kept suspicion on Charles Melquist over the years. Previous girlfriends of his came forward with disturbing claims, describing how he had the ability to render them unconscious using a sleeper hold. They said one moment they were awake, and then they would black out and later wake up with Melquist standing over them, apologizing. One woman even remembered Melquist nearly strangling her to death while out on a date, but she was able to break free. In the case of the Grimes sisters, it's important to note that investigators could not determine exactly how they were killed. They were not shot, they were not stabbed, and they were not beaten to death. The only possible cause that could not be ruled out was suffocation, the same method Melquist admitted to using on Bonnie Scott. During a search of his home, police also discovered a creepy notebook containing the names of young girls. some of whom lived in the same neighborhood as the Grimes sisters. The girls in the notebook were interviewed, and they told detectives they didn't know the Grimes family or Charles Melquist, and they had no idea how he got their phone numbers. Still, despite all of this, there was never enough direct evidence to charge him in connection with their murders. There have also been long-standing rumors surrounding Melquist and his possible mob connections. Some have speculated that he may have had ties to Sam Giancana, one of Chicago's most powerful mob figures at the time. The rumor was also fueled by the fact that his own lawyer, Robert McDonnell, had mob connections, with many clients involved in organized crime. According to these claims, those connections may have played a role in why Melquist was not more aggressively pursued as a suspect in the Grimes murders, and possibly even why he was paroled after serving only 8 years of a 99-year sentence for the Bonnie Scott murder. However, it's important to be clear that these alleged connections have never been proven, and no official records confirm that they influenced the investigation or his release. Melquist was paroled after serving only 8 years behind bars and went on to live a quiet life with a future wife and 2 kids, and later died in 2010 a free man. For many who have studied the case, his name continues to stand out because when you look at the similarities with the location, the victims, and the condition of the bodies, along with the time frame, it becomes difficult to completely dismiss the possibility that Charles Melquist knew more than he ever admitted, or that he may have been responsible for far more than just one murder. For decades, the murders of Barbara and Patricia Grimes remained one of Chicago's most haunting unsolved cases. But in recent years, a new theory has brought renewed attention to a name that had never been seriously connected to the case before. That name is Kenneth Hansen. Hansen was not originally a suspect in the Grimes investigation back in 1957. In fact, at the time, he was largely unknown to the case. But years later, his name would become associated with another brutal crime, one that shared chilling similarities and took decades to solve. In 1955, just 1 year before the Grimes sisters disappeared, 3 young boys, John Schuessler, his brother Anton, and their friend Robert Peterson, vanished after leaving a movie theater in Chicago. Their bodies were later found stripped of clothing and discarded along a roadside near a forest preserve in Chicago, just like the Grimes sisters in 1957. It was a crime that shocked the city, and decades later, many believe Kenneth Hansen is the man also responsible for killing the Grimes sisters. He was eventually convicted twice for the brutal murders of the 3 boys in 1955 and spent the rest of his life in prison, where he died in 2007. For years, the connection between Hansen and the Grimes case was not fully explored. But that changed in 2022 when a retired Chicago police detective named James Hennigan began re-examining the case, and what he uncovered raised serious questions. According to findings highlighted in a 2022 investigation, Hansen may have been far closer to the Grimes sisters than anyone realized. Hennigan found evidence suggesting that Hansen was at the Brighton Park Theater on the same night the Grimes sisters went missing. But that wasn't the only disturbing connection. The location where the Grimes sisters' bodies were discovered, along German Church Road, was not just a random dumping ground. At the time, that land was reportedly being leased and used by Kenneth Hansen as a horse farm. Though it could all just be a strange coincidence, that detail has led some investigators to believe that whoever left the bodies there may have had knowledge of the area or even control over it. When you begin to line up the similarities, the theory becomes difficult to ignore. In both cases, young victims were abducted after going to a movie theater. Their bodies were later found discarded along roadsides, and the crimes occurred within a relatively short time frame of each other. However, there are also important differences. The 3 boys killed in 1955 were violently beaten and strangled, but the Grimes sisters were not, and that difference has led some investigators to question whether the same person could be responsible for both crimes. Still, Detective Hennigan believed the possibility was strong enough to take seriously. He reportedly uncovered information suggesting Kenneth Hansen had both the opportunity and the proximity to commit the crime. And yet, one of the biggest obstacles to proving this theory may never be overcome. At one point, investigators had collected biological evidence from Barbara Grimes' body in 1957 that could have potentially identified her killer, but sadly, over time, that evidence was lost. Without that sample, there is no way to conduct modern DNA testing that could confirm or rule out Hansen's involvement in the murders. Kenneth Hansen died in prison in 2007, and with him, any direct answers may have died as well. But like Charles Melquist, his name has now become part of the case's long list of suspects and unanswered questions. Because if Hansen truly was at the theater that night and the bodies were left on land connected to him, then it raises a chilling possibility that the man responsible for one of Chicago's most brutal child murders may have also been responsible for another. And yet, just like so many other leads in this case, there is no definitive proof, only theories and a growing sense that the truth may have been right in front of investigators all along, but never fully uncovered. After everything that's been investigated over the years, the question still remains: who killed the Grimes sisters? Was it someone they crossed paths with that night, a stranger who saw an opportunity and acted on it? Or was it someone more calculated, someone like Charles Melquist, whose crimes and behavior seemed to mirror parts of this case in unsettling ways? What about Benny Bedwell, who confessed, then took it back, and was even seen with 2 girls of the same age that night? Or could the truth lie with Kenneth Hansen, a man connected to similar crimes, who may have been at the theater that very night? For their mother, Loretta Grimes, the answer never came. She lived the rest of her life without ever receiving closure for what happened to her daughters, passing away still carrying the weight of a case that was never solved. And for the McKinley Park community, the case left a lasting mark, changing how families viewed safety, trust, and the simple idea of a night out that could turn into something unthinkable. After nearly 70 years, this case is still officially unsolved, and with evidence lost, witnesses gone, and time continuing to pass, the chances of ever knowing the truth grow smaller with each year. But who do you think killed the Grimes sisters? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dives into unsolved mysteries like this one, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the playlist on your screen now for more stories just like this one. If you want early access to my videos and other perks, you can also become a channel member using the link in my pinned comment below or by clicking the join button. Channel members get early access to new uploads, a full 24 hours before they're released to everyone else. Thanks for watching.